Hey everyone, this is Steve from GamersNexus.net, and I am here to tell you about Zotac's new 980 Extreme overclocking video card. Mostly I'm here to tell you not to buy this thing. This one is better. If you don't know what this is, it's the reference GTX 980, and that might sound a little crazy, so let's get into that. First of all the specs. This thing is slightly overclocked before you receive it. It has a 1393 megahertz boost clock, whereas the stock card has 1216 megahertz, more or less. That's not really something that matters in the real world where reality is, because you can overclock the reference card to this, which is about 170 megahertz, in about 50 seconds or less. If you've never done it before, that's probably how long it would take. So why get this? Well, in theory, you can overclock this even higher, still higher than the pre-overclock that they ship it at, because first of all, the GM204, that's the GPU in here, the semiconductor that NVIDIA makes, the one that is in the GTX 980, the GM204 is binned out by Zotac. They are selecting a higher quality chip to put in the 980 Extreme, which is a limited edition run. So because they're selecting a higher quality chip, in theory the ASIC quality is higher, so in theory you can overclock higher because it's got better tolerance for higher frequencies and voltages, which are what you are playing with when you're overclocking. So it should be pretty good, but it's also got an aftermarket cooler. This is probably the only thing that is legitimately well designed on this video card, just so you know, other than stuff that's supplied by NVIDIA, obviously. So this is using a single intake fan in the center with two exhaust fans flanking on the left and right. And what that does is basically it pushes the air straight down onto the GPU. The exhaust fans pull that air, push it out the sides, out the back, out the top, all of those places, so that the fins are cooled adequately and there's no stagnant air getting stuck in there from a triple intake setup, which has happened in the past. So this should cool it down better, which means you can overclock higher. It means you can overvolt higher, because it's not going to get as hot. It's not going to shut down for thermal reasons. Now, in addition to this, it's got two 8-pin power intakes, whereas the input for the GTX 980 reference is two 6-pins. That gives us a lot more overhead. This thing can push something like 435 watt TDP. That's the maximum allowed by the GM204 from what Zotac told us. The two 8-pin intakes will allow for at least 400 watts of power, which means we can push this thing higher in frequency and push it higher in voltage, because it's got more power to eat from in terms of the supply before it needs to throttle back on the clocks. Further, the GTX 980 Extreme by Zotac has this marketing module, as I call it. It is called OC Plus, and affectionately has many other names using other mathematical symbols like minus. And OC Plus is USB connected. It connects straight to a micro USB, which would be slightly larger than your phone charger. Connects it to one of those. Plug that into your motherboard USB I/O panel slot that you always plug your USB 2.0 I/O into, and then it's supposed to read all the voltages and everything straight into the computer, into their software called Firestorm. So here's the thing: if you've overclocked cards before, you might be wondering the same thing I was, which was, why can't I do that anyway? Doesn't Windows already know, by nature of the sensors in the GPU, by nature of the thermal probes, by nature of all of these things that it's checking communicating with through the CPU to Windows, doesn't it know what the voltage is? Doesn't it know what the clocks are? How else would Hardware Monitor, how else would GPU-Z know all of the settings on your card when it doesn't have one of these USB modules? Because most video cards do not have one. And I asked Zotac that, and they said that it is required for better control of the voltage. So that's what we were told. And we'll get more into that in a moment. As you can tell, I am very fond of this tool called Firestorm. So that's sort of the overview of this card. Now, it technically has other marketing features like Power Boost, which is a fancy name for solid capacitors that are covered by a piece of metal to make it look cooler, and it has the word Power Boost on it. And then when you install the video card, the word Power Boost is upside down, so that's a cool feature, I guess. It also has red and green LEDs that you can toggle on and off, but you can't change the color of. It turns green when it's idle, red when it's under load. They are also installed on the underside, so all the light goes down where you can't see it, especially if you've got a case with a side panel that cuts off the bottom part of the panel, or the window rather, because there's nothing to see there. So it's great design, and I'm very excited about it. There should be LEDs in the back plate. Now this is, I should mention, does have a back plate, just like the reference GTX 980. That is something NVIDIA is doing standard now with all of their 980 cards. Zotac has copied this design and modified it slightly to make theirs look like carbon fiber. It's still a back plate though, and offers that extra support, which is needed because the video card takes up 2.5 expansion slots. That means it's pretty big, so if you want to use 2 slots for PCI Express and then 1 underneath it for video capture, for a sound card, for really anything that would normally go in that PCIe X1 slot that goes between the 2 PCIe 16 or 8 slots, you're going to have trouble because it's not going to fit because this is gigantic. And also it might get slightly suffocated for air depending on how big that card is, or at least the exhaust will be partially covered up if nothing else. And Zotac calls their armor Exo Armor. It doesn't have the removable backplate like the reference one does. The reference one has a very small slot up here that you can remove for SLI so that the SLI configurations can breathe better. Zotac does not do that because theirs is different. They strayed from the reference design quite a bit. They actually have a custom PCB. This thing goes up very high. Not only is it fat, it's pretty tall too. So it's still going to fit in basically every case, more or less. I won't include mini ITX cases in that, no promises. Still fits, but this kicks up so high that it would potentially become a concern for things like an SLI bridge. And I tested this. The SLI bridge fits okay in terms of this height, does not fit okay in terms of this height if you have a triple SLI bridge that bleeds over. So you need to get something that's smaller and more compact, or you could just not buy this video card, and especially not 2 of them. So the card is fully detailed now. We can talk about why it's getting such a bad rap and is the butt of many jokes in this video. This thing was supposed to be the overclocking card, not car. That would be pretty cool though, and I would like review samples of those. This is supposed to be an overclocking video card that was going to end all overclocking video cards when it comes to air cooling. It was very heavily marketed as such. It has such promise with the cooler and really sounded good on paper. The stock clock is pretty high. It's got this fancy PWM whatever module that's supposed to do special stuff that didn't do those things, but it sounded like it would when we first heard about it, and really it should overclock and overvolt very high because it's got these 2 8-pin power intakes, or inputs I should say, so it can draw more power, it can sustain a higher voltage, and thus a higher clock. None of that happened. What happened is I plugged this thing in, I benchmarked it, then I started overclocking it, and their Firestorm software broke several times, so I started using EVGA Precision and Afterburner by MSI. Those worked a little bit better, but I found out I couldn't overvolt beyond 1212 millivolts, or 1.212 volts. The stock card, so you know, this thing right here from NVIDIA is capable of overvolting up to 1.256 volts, and that extra 0.03-ish volts is actually huge. That is a gigantic difference, and it makes the difference between a high sustained overclock and sort of a mediocre boring overclock closer in the 1500 megahertz range. And that's exactly what happened. And the reason the voltage is locked is twofold. First of all, we assumed, my team assumed that it was a BIOS issue, a VBIOS issue. I told Zotac, I gave them 2 weeks, I said, fix BIOS, make it so that the voltage is unlocked so we can push 1.256 volts at a bare minimum, if not more, because this thing should be able to handle more, because it looks pretty solid in terms of design, but looks aren't everything. And they came back and said, no, it's a software issue, it's because of our Firestorm software, here, try this. And they gave me a different version of Firestorm. Let's slow that down. If you've ever overclocked hardware, it is not the hardware that is dependent on the software. The hardware will do basically whatever you tell it to within the hard limits set in BIOS. That's pretty important to know. The software, if this thing could push 1.25 whatever volts or higher, Precision should be able to do it, Afterburner should be able to do it, Firestorm, whatever, that I guess should be able to do it, but they can't. And Firestorm can only do it if you've got this plugged in, and none of the other software can do it if you have this USB thing plugged in, even though reference can. So it's almost like DRM. It's sort of like an iPod being forced to use iTunes in order to overclock, and that goes in order to listen to music. And this being forced to use Firestorm to overclock is sort of comical because it goes against everything overclockers stand for. They are hackers by nature. They want to use whatever software they want to use, and because this module doesn't actually add any functionality in terms of things you can tweak, except, well, you'll see it in the article, it doesn't really add very much. All it does is unlock something that you can already do with every other video card on the market normally through whatever software you want to use. So that's sort of annoying, and that's part one of why this thing is limited to 1.212 volts, and if you have the special press-only version of the software, 1.256, and that will be distributed to hand-picked overclockers, so I guess you're not trusted to do it if you're not special. The second reason this can't overvolt very high and is stuck is because the VRM is bad. It is my very strong speculation based on facts and sources that the VRM in this was selected perhaps before the GTX 980 spec was revealed by NVIDIA. Maybe. That's just my really strong speculation. So if it was picked before the spec was released by NVIDIA, Zotac maybe bargained for a little bit more or less than what happened in reality. The result is a VRM that cannot handle the stock reference overvoltage of 1.256 volts. Instead, it's pretty stuck to 1.2 volts. And VBIOS will tell you that. They have not updated VBIOS as I sort of demanded because the hardware can't handle it, because the VRM is bad, because the PWM is very DRM-like in nature and probably bad. And so we're limited. We're limited in what we can overvolt, and thus limited how we can overclock. And those limits are shown in GPU-Z, which is the standard tool for third-party checking of specifications on a video card. It shows in GPU-Z because GPU-Z will not report a higher voltage than 1.2 volts on this. In talking to Zotac, they said, you need to use Firestorm to see the voltage accurately because VBIOS is limited to 1.2 volts, and we're using this OC+, whatever, to bypass the VID in BIOS and push higher voltage. But every tool I've used, including Firestorm, seem to say this gets stuck at 1.2. Firestorm, in fact, is worse than that, because half the time it doesn't even apply the overvoltage I ask it to apply. Other times it doesn't report voltage at all. It says 0 volts, which hopefully that's not happening. That'd be sort of like having a 0 BPM heart rate. And it also says 0 watts half the time. So Firestorm, whether everything they said can be true, that's fine. All of that can be true about the VID, about VBIOS, all of that. Perfectly true, whatever. It's just say it is. It doesn't matter, because I can't trust Firestorm to tell me anything accurate about this video card. And when I test it in games, and when I use tools to log the boost clock, it can't push higher than a reference card that I spent maybe an hour doing a hard overclock on, and I spent far more time on this, a few days, up to a week perhaps. I'd rather not think about it. But the GTX 980 reference, getting into the numbers, forget all this. This thing, 980 reference from NVIDIA that I've tested already, can overclock to 1560.3 megahertz boost. That is the boost clock. With that's a 295 megahertz offset from base. Base is something like 1126 on this and 1216 boost. So quite a big offset to be able to push 1560. That's stable. That's with a 30-something millivolt overvoltage, and that voltage is applied correctly. That makes it run at 1.25 volts, which is the maximum voltage of the reference card, and it cools reasonably. It's in the 50s or something after subtracting for ambient, a little bit lower, but it's in that area, so it cools well enough. Now this cooler would be much better, but still, that's sort of where it stands. The memory overclock, I think I pushed about 400 megahertz on the memory overclock. Other websites have done closer to 800. That really wasn't my concern. I was more interested in the boost clock anyway. And this thing, oh, I should note, with Maxwell overclocking, you use power percent target, or power target percent rather, when you're overclocking. The reference card can go to 125% of TDP, of being the multiplication. So 125% times TDP, which is like 170-ish, more or less. That means it can take effectively 25% more watts from base that it can then apply to your overvoltage and your clock so that you can obtain, sustain, and run stably the higher clocks. So that's a very quick rundown on Maxwell overclocking. This thing can go to 111% TDP, and it is using, I got it up to 1500 and like 20 megahertz, somewhat stable with some texture flickering and blue flickering on the screen, which any overclockers would be familiar with through Firestorm, the benchmarking software. So it's about 40 megahertz lower than what I did on reference. It costs $60 more. It runs maybe 5 to 10 degrees cooler Celsius. That's somewhat substantial, but it can't overclock as high. So why? And $60 more, why? You'd be better off buying the Asus Strix or EVGA's cards, or waiting on Kingpin, or even like MSI has some good cards. There are a lot. Gigabyte's G1 can do a much higher voltage. It can do like 1 point something insane, 1.4, 1.6, something like that. It can sustain a way higher overclock, way higher overvoltage. Why would you buy this? It's $20 more to get something insanely better, and with really a pretty similar cooler setup on like the aftermarket cooler. So that's sort of the rundown on this. You've seen all the charts by now running through the video. I've just kind of been popping them up over my face so that you can see the benchmarks. Check the link in the description below to see the full details where I talk about all the story leading up to now, all my complaints and emails and Skype messages I sent to Zotac. Their US marketing team is fantastic. I want to thank them for tolerating my insistence that this video card should be much better and is not. And thank them for pushing all of my complaints to the PM team, which failed to deliver. So that is the Zotac GTX 980 Extreme. It should have put them on the map. It sadly did not. I sincerely am saddened by this, and I hope that next time they can do better. If there is a next time for an overclocking card, please do not buy this. Please buy something like the Gigabyte G1 instead, or really anything else, Asus Strix. The reference card, this thing, $550. Overclocks better. I would not recommend running this at the 1560 megahertz overclock I did 24/7. It's probably not too good for the card's health. If you're an overclocker, you don't care about the card's health. You know that it won't die before you replace it with a new toy to overclock anyway. But do be careful how hard you push these things, because even this one at a high overclock like that 1521 I was running with 111% TDP, that's going to start beating up the silicon pretty quickly and wear it out. So that is the 980 Extreme. I'm sorry I could not bear you better news, but hopefully I saved you some money. Check out our links and articles and all that stuff to learn more about this video card, why it failed, and what other companies can learn about it. And I will see you all next time. Peace.